Welcome to another episode of our channel. In this video, we'll discuss a statement made by President Trump demanding that the Nigerian government protect the country's Christian population. Otherwise, he promised attacks against the groups responsible for the atrocities. On Saturday, November 1st, President Trump accused the Nigerian government of not doing enough to protect Christians from extremist groups in the country. An accusation that led to a direct threat with Trump and his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, confirming that the United States would take military action in Nigeria to protect the Christian population. According to Trump, the intention would be to eliminate the extremist groups responsible for these attacks quickly and decisively. Trump directly accused the Nigerian government of failing to protect the Christians, highlighting that the violence against this religious community represented an existential threat. With thousands of Christians being targeted by directed violence, an accusation supported by evidence and denunciations from various groups operating in the country. The Nigerian government, in turn, reacted vehemently to these accusations, with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu defending publicly that Nigeria has been working to protect all its religious communities, including Christians. Tinubu stated that characterizing Nigeria as religiously intolerant does not match the country's reality, and that the government has been committed to ensuring religious freedom for all citizens. However, this defense did not convince Donald Trump, who maintained his stance, and the tension between the two countries increased. The issue then is not limited to a dispute over religious rights, but involves security and geopolitical issues of much greater scope. The main group involved in these attacks is Boko Haram, an Islamic extremist and terrorist organization that emerged in northern Nigeria in the early 2000s. The group seeks to establish a strict Islamic state based on its radical interpretation of Islamic law, and targets not only Christians but also Muslims it considers deviant from their beliefs. Furthermore, Boko Haram has allied with other radical factions in the region, such as the Islamic State in West Africa Province, a branch of ISIS. These groups operate mainly in remote and hard-to-reach areas, such as the forests of Borno State in northeastern Nigeria, and other border regions, including parts of Chad and Cameroon. These locations are ideal for hideouts and training, where they can move without major obstacles, complicating security operations. They are tremendously brutal and violent, destroying entire villages as a show of force. The most common tactics of these groups include ambushes, surprise attacks on villages, and kidnappings, like the infamous kidnapping of the 276 Chibok girls in 2014, most of them Christians with 82 still missing. They also use improvised explosive devices and remote detonation devices to increase the impact of their attacks. They exploit political instability and security challenges to spread fear, recruiting local youth through promises of power and money. Christian communities in particular are strategic targets, as these groups see them as infidels and symbols of the Western presence they wish to eliminate, with data confirming that in the last 25 years, about 65,000 Christians were executed in Nigeria just for being Christians. The guerrilla tactics of Boko Haram, combined with Nigeria's vast territory and the government's challenges in controlling the affected regions, make these groups an even more difficult threat to eradicate. But could the United States really take military action in Nigeria against these groups? Trump's military action threat faces significant hurdles, starting with the fact that the United States has pulled its forces from the region. As happened with the withdrawal of troops from Niger, north of Nigeria, which took place in 2024. Without the American military presence in Niger, which at its peak included more than 1,000 military personnel, the United States would be forced to operate from aircraft carriers or much more distant bases, also risking flying over unauthorized airspace. Furthermore, a U.S. airstrike would likely face the difficulty of locating extremist groups spread over vast areas, requiring close cooperation with Nigerian forces. something the country's government does not seem very willing to offer. Trump also threatened to cut aid to Nigeria, making this scenario even more challenging. In addition, there are other factors, such as separatists in the south and criminal organizations in the northwest, also impacting the country's security, making everything even more complex. Violence against Christians in Nigeria is not an isolated phenomenon, with the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom reporting in 2024 that both Christians and Muslims in various regions of the country have been victims of extremist violence. But most accusations against the Nigerian government focus on protecting Christians who are not receiving the necessary support. Despite Christians making up about 49% of the population, making Nigeria the African country with the largest Christian population. If the United States really decides to intervene militarily, the repercussions would not be limited to Nigeria. With the impact of an intervention in an African country with so many internal divisions potentially triggering a series of reactions across the continent, and even in other global powers. In fact, the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Niger in 2024 best demonstrates the growing caution of the United States in that region, making this type of action even more risky. Trump's initiative to protect Christian communities in Nigeria is very welcome and genuinely necessary, given the persecution and thousands of executions they suffer in the country. But, as we have seen here, the challenges are enormous, with Boko Haram, due to its fragmented nature, spreading over a vast area, and with obstacles posed by the terrain, greatly complicating any military action. Therefore, if Trump really proceeds with military actions, will he have to choose between dropping some bombs in the middle of forests, mountains, and savannas in the hope of catching small scattered groups? Or will he have to enter the country with an intervention force, risking starting a long war with very uncertain results, just as happened in nearly 20 years of war in Afghanistan? And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and activate the notification bell to not miss any updates.